What if the place you thought was abandoned was actually alive, trapping souls in a never-ending nightmare? Ataraxia Springs is more than a forgotten sanatorium. It's a prison where time loops, memories betray, and darkness hunts relentlessly. Follow Melissa Johansson's chilling journey as she unravels buried secrets, faces unspeakable horrors, and confronts a curse that refuses to die. But beware, some doors, once opened, can never be closed. Are you ready to step inside? Because once you do, the nightmare might never let you go. I don't know why we stopped that night. My parents were in a hurry to get to Cheyenne for the Halloween festival, but the moment Dad saw the small figure walking along the desolate roadside, everything changed. The headlights sliced through the Wyoming fog, revealing her just standing there, a thin girl dressed in a cheap Halloween costume shaped like a human skeleton. The white bones painted on black fabric glowed under the high beams, as if floating in the darkness. She couldn't have been older than 10. No adults nearby, no cars broken down, no sign of a house or any civilization for miles. Just her, alone. Dad pulled over instinctively. My mother inhaled sharply, gripping the door handle as if bracing for something unknown. "Are you seeing this?" she whispered. He nodded. "I can't just leave her here." The door creaked open and my father stepped out into the chilly October air. The wind whistled across the plains like some distant, sorrowful song. He approached her carefully, crouching to her eye level. "Sweetheart, are you okay? Where are your parents?" The girl blinked at him with wide, vacant eyes. Her voice was soft, flat, unnervingly calm. "I got lost. I'm trying to get back to Ataraxia Springs." Dad frowned. "Ataraxia Springs? Where's that, honey? Is it near here?" She shook her head gently. "It's home." I shifted in my seat, my skin prickling even though I was safe inside the car. Something about the way she said it made the hairs on my neck stand up. Dad glanced back at Mom, his expression troubled. "That town doesn't exist," he muttered under his breath, barely audible. He opened the rear door and guided her inside. She slid into the seat next to me. Up close, she looked so pale, like her skin had forgotten how to carry blood. There was no dirt on her face, no scratches, no signs of injury or distress. But there was something missing, something not quite there. "What's your name, sweetheart?" my mother asked, attempting a soothing smile. The girl hesitated for a moment, as though trying to remember. Melissa Johansson." Her voice was thin, like a distant echo. As Dad drove toward the nearest sheriff's office, an unsettling silence filled the car. I kept glancing sideways, trying not to stare, but unable to stop. She sat unnaturally still, hands folded on her lap, eyes fixed on nothing, as if gazing into a place I couldn't see. We reached the Pine Ridge County Sheriff's Office about 20 minutes later. The building stood under flickering sodium lights, its weathered brick facade adding to the growing sense of unease. Sheriff Dunham met us outside, his gut instinct already wary. Dad explained the situation as the sheriff inspected Melissa with a squinting, cautious eye. "Ataraxia Springs," Dunham repeated, puzzled. "Ain't no town by that name anywhere in Wyoming, or in the county for that matter." My father nodded. "That's what worries me." Inside the station, they questioned her gently. Name, address, parents' names, phone numbers. Melissa provided them all with perfect clarity. Everything sounded plausible, except none of it checked out. Every call led to dead ends. Every address came back invalid. "Her parents don't seem to exist," Deputy Harper whispered to the sheriff as they reviewed the phone logs. Sheriff Dunham rubbed his temples, fatigue overtaking irritation. "Check with State Child Services, and call the damn FBI if you have to. Something's not right." Melissa sat quietly in the corner, swinging her legs gently as if completely detached from the adults' growing panic. As the night deepened, a cold draft crept into the small office. The wind outside howled stronger, almost like voices murmuring through cracks in the walls. The fax machine buzzed to life without prompt, startling everyone in the room. A single sheet printed slowly, its text faint and uneven as if copied from a nearly erased file. "Ataraxia Springs," Restricted zone since 1927. The room fell into frozen silence. Sheriff Dunham stared at the paper, his lips parting as though trying to find an explanation, but finding none. This has to be some mistake. But deep in my gut, even as a child, I knew better. Melissa finally turned her head toward me for the first time since entering the station. "My sister tried to save me," she said softly, her voice breaking through the heavy air like a whisper from the dead, but the door closed. Her eyes locked onto mine, and I felt the chill of something ancient reaching into my chest, a sensation that would never fully leave me, not even decades later. Because that little girl sitting beside me was me. The hours stretched endlessly inside the sheriff's office, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead as if they, too, were uneasy. My parents had given statements, answered the same questions multiple times, but nothing made sense, not to them, not to the officers, not even to me. Melissa, me, sat quietly at the far end of the room, her skeletal costume still clinging to her thin frame like some grim foreshadowing. Occasionally she would hum softly under her breath, a tune I couldn't quite recognize, but one that sounded familiar in a way I couldn't explain. The sheriff stepped out to take a call, leaving the deputy and my father exchanging nervous glances. My mother had drifted into exhausted silence, clutching her purse as though it was some kind of talisman against the absurdity unfolding around us. Outside, the wind howled louder. Even through the heavy brick walls, the gusts carried a hollow, almost mechanical groan, as if something enormous was shifting underground. The fax machine stirred again. Another sheet of paper slid out slowly, this time entirely blank, save for a jagged line drawn diagonally across the page. No text. No explanation, just that crude, uneven line, as if someone or something had run a shaky hand across the feed. Deputy Harper grabbed the sheet and frowned. "Faulty machine, probably," he muttered without conviction. My father didn't respond. He kept glancing at the girl across the room, the child who claimed her name was Melissa Johansson, who listed parents no one could find, who spoke of a town that didn't exist. That's when the power cut. The fluorescent bulbs above us flickered violently, humming a final time before plunging the office into darkness. The silence afterward was crushing. Only the wind outside continued, now screaming, as if angry at being ignored. My mother gasped, fumbling for her phone to activate its flashlight. The weak beam cast long shadows against the walls. The deputy cursed under his breath, reaching for his belt where his own flashlight hung. "Stay here," Sheriff Dunham barked from the hallway, his silhouette barely visible against the weak glow of the emergency exit signs. "Might be the lines down again." Melissa didn't react. She remained seated, her pale face expressionless in the dim light. The humming stopped. Something moved outside the station. The crunch of gravel. Heavy footsteps. The deputy's radio crackled suddenly, a static-filled voice barely intelligible. "Unit, confirm movement." "That can't be right," Harper said, frowning at the device. "We've got no patrols out here tonight." Another footstep, closer now, heavily deliberate. Like someone dragging something behind them, Melissa finally turned her head slowly, her vacant eyes now focused on the front entrance, as if she was expecting whoever or whatever it was. "I told you," she whispered, barely audible. The door closed. The emergency lights flickered again, briefly revealing the large glass window at the front of the office. For a split second, I thought I saw a figure standing there. Not a man, not a woman, something else. It was tall, impossibly thin with elongated arms that hung too low. Its head was bald, tilted slightly to one side, as if studying us like curious prey. No facial features were visible, except for two faint, glowing orbs where eyes should have been. Golden, luminescent, and unnervingly still. I blinked, and it was gone. My mother screamed as the front door handle rattled violently. The sound echoed through the building like metal grinding against bone. Harper unholstered his weapon. "Who's there?" "Identify yourself," he shouted, his voice trembling despite the bravado. Silence. The handle rattled again, more aggressive this time, accompanied by a sharp, guttural screech from beyond the door. Something primal. Dunham returned, gun drawn, scanning the scene with eyes wide. "Everybody in the back," he ordered. "Now!" We stumbled into a small archive room at the rear of the station as the sheriff sealed the heavy steel door behind us. The room smelled of mildew and forgotten paperwork. Rows of old case files, boxes stacked to the ceiling, and yellowed maps pinned along one wall. Melissa finally stood for the first time since arriving. She didn't seem frightened. If anything, she looked resigned. "It's always the same," she said softly. "They come when the door closes." "What door?" "What are you talking about?" Dunham asked sharply, sweat beading across his brow. "The door under the hospital," she replied, almost dreamlike. "It was never meant to stay open this long," Harper whispered. "What hospital?" "Ataraxia Springs," she said. "It was closed before I was born." Dunham looked to Harper, both of them lost, their faces pale. There was no Ataraxia Springs on any map. There never was. Suddenly, one of the boxes on the top shelf toppled over on its own, spilling old photographs and files across the floor. Among them, a faded black and white image slid to my feet. It showed a group of men, standing proudly in front of a large, domed building. Above the entrance was a crumbling stone sign that read, "Ataraxia Springs, Sanatorium, Est, 1912. In the corner of the photograph, barely visible behind one of the stone pillars, was a small silhouette. A girl in a skeleton costume. The same costume Melissa was wearing right now. Before anyone could react, a deafening thud shook the door behind us. The metal groaned as if something enormous had slammed against it. Again and again. Each impact louder, stronger, closer to breaking through. My pulse pounded in my ears. My mother sobbed quietly, clinging to my arm. Melissa only whispered, "They never stay away for long." The final slam against the door made the hinges buckle. Dust rained from the ceiling as the light above flickered one last time. And then the door creaked open. The door never fully opened. Instead, something pressed against the gap, breathing softly through the thin crack. The air changed. It grew heavier, thicker, like stepping into a humid basement after years of rot. The sound of labored breathing came through, slow and patient, as if whatever stood on the other side wasn't in any hurry. Sheriff Dunham locked the bolt again with shaking hands, his face pale and glistening under the flickering emergency light. "Whatever that is, it ain't human," he whispered. Melissa said nothing. She sat cross-legged on the dusty floor, humming that strange melody again. That was my first memory of them. I was moved to a state-run orphanage 2 days later. They told me my parents had done everything they could, but this situation was too complicated. No one could find any relatives tied to me, at least none who existed in any system. The therapist said my story didn't make sense. They called it trauma response. False memory syndrome, coping mechanism. I stopped trying to explain. Years passed. They shaved the sharp edges off my story until it no longer belonged to me. Melissa Johansson became a blank name in state records. The girl who appeared one Halloween night out of nowhere. No matching missing persons. No birth certificate. No school records. Nothing. The only thing left was that photograph, the one they found in the sheriff's office archive. They kept it locked away with my file, though the staff pretended it didn't exist. Sometimes I dreamed of that night. The breath on the other side of the door, the glowing orbs peeking through cracks, the hum Melissa sang to herself. Except, when I woke, I was never sure if the humming was coming from my dream or from inside the walls. By the time I turned 18, I was ready to leave it all behind, or at least I thought I was. 23 years later, I found myself back near where it started. The area had changed, but not entirely. Cheyenne had grown, swallowing nearby towns into its suburban sprawl, but pockets of wilderness still clung stubbornly to the edges. And there, hidden behind a state-owned chain-link fence with a half-rusted sign reading Cemetery of Wyoming Department of Health, no trespassing, stood the crumbling remains of the Ataraxia Springs Sanatorium. I'd driven past it 100 times without stopping, but not today. Today, the envelope arrived. The letter was hand-delivered to my apartment that morning by a man I didn't recognize. He wore an old tweed jacket, smelled faintly of tobacco, and carried an air of uncomfortable familiarity. "You're Melissa Johansson, correct?" he asked. I hesitated before answering. "Yes." "This is for you." He handed me the envelope, nodded once, and walked away. No name, no explanation. The handwriting on the front was delicate but shaky. "To my sister, Melissa Johansson, in the event she is found." The postmark read, Paris, France. Inside was a single page, written in faded ink, dated 1970. "Dearest Melissa, if you are reading this, it means the loop has not yet broken. I escaped, but not truly, not fully. They find a way to pull us back. Ataraxia Springs never lets go of its children. Forgive me for leaving you there. I will search for you, always. Marjorie, Marjorie." The name I hadn't heard since I was 10 years old. My sister. My fingers trembled as I read it again and again. My mind screamed that it was impossible, and yet, here it was. Proof of something real beneath the layers of gaslighting and medical jargon that had been built around me for decades. I stared at the words until they blurred into tears. She lived. Or maybe she still did. Now, standing in front of the broken fence and staring at the skeletal outline of the sanatorium, I understood what I had to do. The building loomed like a rotting corpse on the edge of memory and nightmare. The entrance was partially collapsed, but gaps in the walls revealed shadowy interiors. Wind whistled through jagged window frames like faint whispers begging to be heard. There was no official record of Ataraxia Springs ever existing. No newspaper archives, no state documents, no police reports. Nothing but the photograph and my fragmented memories until now. As I slipped through the hole in the fence, the temperature dropped sharply. The air smelled of mildew, old medicine, and something faintly metallic. Blood or rust, I couldn't tell. My flashlight beam wavered as I stepped into the crumbling front hall. Old patient chairs, overturned and broken, littered the tiled floor. A reception desk sat crooked, papers yellowed and curled by decades of moisture scattered beneath it. Faint footprints in the dust, not mine, led deeper inside, fresh. I wasn't alone. Far ahead, beyond the first hallway, something moved. Just for a moment, a shadow, gliding unnaturally across the far wall before vanishing around the corner. My breath caught, my heart hammered, but my feet kept moving forward. The door had closed once before. I was here to open it. The deeper I went, the heavier the air became. It wasn't just the smell of rot and mildew. It was something denser, thicker, as though every step forward was cutting through layers of invisible fabric wrapped tightly around me. The flashlight flickered. I stopped. Ahead, in the center of the main hallway, a faint outline shimmered in my peripheral vision. When I turned the light toward it, there was nothing. Just the cracked linoleum floor, warped from decades of moisture, and broken ceiling tiles dangling like rotten teeth overhead. But I knew what I saw. The whisper came next. Not from behind me, not from ahead, but from somewhere beside me, like it crawled under my skin. Melissa. My name, spoken softly, as though breathed into my ear. I spun around, flashlight beam slicing through empty air. Nothing. I clenched my jaw and pressed forward. The hall ended at a pair of wide, rusted doors that once led into the patient wards. The faded lettering above read, Ward A Quarantine Level. I hesitated before pushing one door open with a groan that echoed unnaturally loud in the hollow space. Inside, rows of old beds sat arranged like graves, each mattress long gone, leaving only the metal frames behind. In the far corner, I spotted something unusual. A stack of patient files still mostly intact, protected beneath a fallen beam that had shielded them from decades of decay. I approached, my hands trembling as I pulled one from the stack. Patient 34, Marjorie Johansson. The name burned into my chest like a hot iron. The file was thin, too thin. Only 2 pages. The first, admission form dated 1889. The second, a handwritten note dated nearly 80 years later. Subject appears to exhibit cyclical reoccurrence across generational timelines, unstable reality anchor, no successful extraction to date. Loop intact. Containment protocol remains in effect. Filed, 1970. I couldn't breathe. My head swam as though the entire room tilted sideways. The ink blurred, my stomach twisted as bile surged into my throat. They knew. They always knew. This place wasn't abandoned, not entirely. Not in the way I'd been told. I dropped the file and stumbled back. Behind me, a faint creak. I turned. There she stood. Marjorie. Older than I remembered, but unmistakable. Her long hair was tied back loosely, her face thinner, hollow, but her eyes, God, her eyes, were still the same, but something was wrong. Her skin looked pale, almost waxen. Her movements were stiff, like a marionette learning to walk. She smiled too wide, too slow. "You came back?" she whispered. "Marjorie?" My voice cracked, my mind refusing to fully accept what I was seeing. "Is it really you?" Her head tilted, neck joints popping softly. "It's always me, Melissa. Every time." I staggered backward, bumping into the corner of one rusted bed frame. What do you mean every time?" Her smile faltered for a moment, eyes twitching unnaturally, as if something behind them struggled for control. "The door closes. The loop resets. But you always return. I don't understand. You were never meant to leave." Her voice trembled now. "Neither was I." A sharp metallic clang interrupted us. The sound came from the hallway behind her. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Something approaching. Her smile vanished completely. "You have to hide." "What?" "No." Her voice sharpened, frantic now. "Hide?" I dove behind one of the old overturned cabinets, just as the heavy metal door groaned open. Through the narrow crack, I saw it enter. The thing. Taller than any man, its skin pale like stretched wax, sagging from its elongated frame. Its limbs moved unnaturally, as if bones bent where they shouldn't. But its head, oh God, its head, dragged behind slightly, hanging from the neck like it was too heavy to support. 2 large orbs protruded from its face. Smooth, golden, reflective. They weren't eyes in the human sense. They didn't blink. They simply pulsed faintly with a glow that seemed hungry. The same golden glow I remembered from that first night at the sheriff's office. It stood silently, as though sniffing the air. Its chest expanded slowly, rhythmically, like it was tasting my fear. Then the humming began, that same dreadful melody from my childhood, only this time it wasn't coming from Marjorie. It was coming from it. My stomach coiled in terror, every muscle locking in place as if my body instinctively tried to play dead. The creature's head twisted unnaturally, scanning the room. Marjorie stood perfectly still, her face expressionless again, as if she was no longer present inside her own body. The creature moved closer, towering over her, tilting its head down. They stood there, locked in some silent exchange I couldn't comprehend. Then, its hand extended, gently resting on her shoulder. "You did well," it rasped in a voice so distorted it felt like multiple beings speaking at once. "The loop remains pure." A pulse of golden light flashed from its eyes. Marjorie's head snapped back unnaturally and her body stiffened, motionless like a mannequin. I clamped my hand over my mouth to suppress the scream clawing its way up my throat. The creature turned slightly, head twisting toward my direction, as if sensing the vibration of my heartbeat. I froze. Every breath threatened to betray me. And then, like a cruel trick, the old cabinet I hid behind creaked softly under my weight. The creature's head snapped fully toward me. Its golden eyes flared, locking onto my hiding place. The game was over. The hospital had swallowed me whole, but it was only beginning to reveal its true nature. The air inside was stale and heavy, but there was an electric charge under the surface, a feeling that every shadow was watching, waiting. I moved cautiously, flashlight sweeping across peeling wallpaper, broken tiles, and shattered glass. Every step echoed in the vast emptiness like a scream. Behind me, Marjorie's footsteps faltered. I glanced back and saw her face pale, eyes darting nervously. Ryan and Johnny followed, tension thick between them. The hospital wasn't just a building anymore. It was a living entity, breathing and hungry. As we turned a corner, the beam of my flashlight landed on something that made me freeze. An old metal door hanging ajar, revealing a room beyond filled with rusted beds and torn sheets. Inside, there was a body. Not fresh, but not ancient either. The remains sprawled across the floor looked as if they had been abandoned for years. Yet something about them was unsettlingly recent. Ashley, trailing behind us, let out a shaky breath. That looks like me. I swallowed hard, moving closer. The corpse wore a battered wristwatch, one I recognized instantly. It was the same model as Ashley's, the one she never took off. The metal was scratched and cracked in the exact same places. Could this be some kind of sick joke? Ryan whispered, voice barely audible, but I knew it wasn't. Something dark was playing with us, pulling us deeper into its twisted game. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered and went out. I fumbled with it, heart pounding in the suffocating darkness. And then I saw them. Two glowing orbs, hanging in the black like twin moons, golden, eerily still, reflecting everything around them without blinking. They belonged to the thing. A grotesque shadow loomed in the doorway, its elongated limbs barely contained by the peeling walls. Its sagging, pale flesh hung loosely from its frame, swaying like seaweed caught in an underwater current. It moved with a terrifying grace, its head tilted unnaturally to the side, watching us as if we were insignificant insects. Ashley screamed, her voice slicing through the silence like a knife. She tried to run, but the creature was faster. A long, sinewy arm shot out, grabbing her by the leg and dragging her back into the darkness. We all froze, paralyzed by the sound of tearing fabric and wet, sickening snaps. Ryan dropped to his knees, clutching Ashley's screaming hand. "No, no, please!" Johnny's eyes were wide with terror as he backed away, trembling. The creature's golden eyes locked onto me for a brief moment before it vanished with Ashley, swallowed by the shadows. I realized then that we were trapped. The hospital was no ordinary place. It was a labyrinth designed to consume us. We tried to move, but the halls seemed to twist and turn, leading us in circles. Every door we opened revealed the same empty, decaying rooms. The air grew colder, the darkness thicker. Johnny suddenly collapsed, convulsing violently on the floor. His screams echoed through the corridors, mingling with the distant, mocking laughter that seemed to come from the walls themselves. I rushed to his side, trying to hold him steady. But then I saw it. A small, dark shape crawling from beneath his shirt. Spider-like legs, slick and shiny, protruded from his back, writhing as if alive. Johnny's screams turned into guttural cries, his body contorting as the appendages grew longer, thicker. He was becoming one of them, a puppet of the thing with the golden eyes. I wanted to help, but fear rooted me in place. The hospital was breaking us down, piece by piece. The last thing I heard before I blacked out was the creature's whisper in my mind, echoing like a twisted lullaby. "The loop never ends, Melissa. You belong to Ataraxia now." When I woke, the cold floor was pressed against my cheek, the dust thick in my nostrils. The hospital was silent for a moment, a deceptive calm that only made the shadows feel heavier, more alive. Johnny was gone. Ashley's screams had long since faded into an eerie stillness, replaced by something far worse. The knowledge that the thing was hunting us, and it had claimed its first victims. My hands trembled as I forced myself to stand, legs weak and unsteady. Marjorie reached out to steady me, her eyes sunken but fierce. "We need to keep moving," she whispered. "It won't stop until it has us all." The narrow corridor stretched before us, walls closing in like the grip of some ancient predator. Every step echoed, but I could feel eyes watching, unblinking and patient. The golden orbs. Those terrible, glowing eyes that pierced through darkness and sanity alike. We found a small room marked library on a rusted plaque. The air was thick with the smell of mold and old paper. Shelves leaned crookedly, stacked with volumes that had long lost their covers, their spines cracked and faded. Marjorie pulled open a drawer and produced a leather-bound journal. The pages were brittle, filled with cramped handwriting that twisted and looped in a language I didn't recognize, until I saw the dates. My breath caught. This has to be her," I murmured, flipping carefully through the fragile pages. Names, dates, and drawings filled the journal, symbols that seemed to pulse with dark meaning. Diagrams of creatures, half spider, half human, and sketches of the sanatorium itself. "Marjorie's journal," Marjorie said, eyes scanning the entries. She was trying to understand it, trying to break the cycle, but the last pages were stained with something dark, blotchy, as if smeared in blood. The final entry was barely legible. "They are coming for me, for all of us. The loop tightens, and there is no escape." Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a loud bang from the hallway, a door slamming shut, trapping us inside. I shivered, realizing that the hospital wasn't just a building, it was a prison, and we were its prey. Then came the whispering, soft, swirling voices that slithered through the air, wrapping around my mind like serpents. Artist Melissa. The name sounded both loving and cruel, a siren's call from a place I never wanted to return to. Marjorie's hand gripped mine tightly. "It's trying to break us." A cold sweat drenched my back as I scanned the room. Shadows flickered and twisted, forming shapes that morphed and melted before my eyes. And then I saw it. A small golden orb resting on the floor, glowing faintly with that same unnatural light. I reached out, fingers trembling, and as I touched it, a flood of memories crashed into me. Visions of the hospital, the sanatorium grounds, the endless nights filled with fear and ritual. I saw Marjorie, standing in a circle of flickering candles, chanting words I couldn't understand. I saw the creature with its many legs dragging victims into the darkness. I saw myself, a child lost in the maze, desperate to escape, but most terrifying was the certainty that this was a cycle, a loop repeating across generations, each victim trapped in the same nightmare, unable to break free. "We're caught," I whispered. "All of us?" Marjorie nodded, eyes haunted but resolute. "But maybe we can change the ending." As the door behind us rattled violently, the golden orb pulsed brighter. The hospital seemed to inhale, its walls closing in tighter, its hunger growing. We had to find a way out. Before it was too late. The hospital's walls seemed to pulse around me, alive with secrets and shadows that twisted reality like a funhouse mirror. Every step I took echoed against the crumbling plaster, each breath drawing in the stale scent of decay and forgotten sorrow. I had long ceased to believe this place was abandoned. It was a living nightmare, a rift between worlds, and I was trapped inside its grasp. Marjorie walked beside me, her movements stiff but purposeful. Ryan followed, his face drawn and pale, while Johnny's absence hung over us like a dark cloud. The narrow corridor stretched ahead, ending at a shattered balcony door that led to nowhere. Or so it seemed. I reached out and pushed the rusted handle, expecting the door to resist or crumble, but it swung open with a haunting creak, revealing the most impossible scene I'd ever witnessed. Outside, where the world should have spread open, there was only chaos. A crimson sky stretched endlessly, veined with dark clouds that churned like boiling blood. Below, the ground writhed and buckled, a massive expanse of flesh and bone shifting beneath a roiling haze of sulfur and smoke. Giant tendrils rose and fell with a sickening rhythm, as if the land itself was breathing, pulsating with a monstrous heartbeat. Creatures, half human, half abomination, prowled the terrain, their forms grotesque and sprawling. Massive birds circled overhead, their cries piercing the red mist. It was a vision from hell, a realm of eternal torment and madness. Marjorie's breath hitched beside me, and she clasped my arm tightly. "This is what lies beyond Ataraxia's door," she whispered. "The true prison." I swallowed hard, the weight of that revelation settling like a stone in my chest. "We need to get back inside," Ryan urged, his voice trembling, but the hospital had other plans. The door slammed shut behind us with a thunderous bang, sealing us into this hellish vantage point. Inside, the air grew colder, the shadows deeper. Then came the creeping dread, the subtle sounds of movement, the scratch of claws against stone. From the darkness emerged a host of smaller creatures, scuttling figures with spindly legs and glowing golden eyes. They moved with unnatural coordination, swarming the walls and ceilings like a living nightmare. From the depths of the corridor, a guttural growl echoed, a sound that shook the very foundation. Johnny's voice cracked through the gloom, a desperate plea carried on ragged breaths. I turned to see him, transformed beyond recognition. From his back, 8 spider-like legs sprouted, writhing and twitching, his face contorted in pain, his body a grotesque mockery of humanity. Marjorie reached out, tears streaking her pale cheeks. "Johnny," she cried. He grasped her hand weakly, eyes filled with torment and fear. "We have to leave," I said, voice shaking. But the hospital was a maze, corridors looping back on themselves, walls shifting like a living puzzle. Every exit led only to more darkness. The creature with the golden eyes was hunting us relentlessly, its presence suffocating and inescapable. As Johnny convulsed, his new limbs scrambling desperately for purchase, I felt a surge of helplessness. The hospital's grip tightened, and I knew the nightmare was far from over. The air grew colder still as we pushed deeper into the hospital's bowels. Every breath came out in small, desperate puffs, hanging like smoke in the dim light. Shadows danced along the cracked walls, shifting in impossible ways that made my skin crawl. The golden orb from the previous encounter still burned faintly in my pocket, a small but heavy reminder of the darkness lurking just beyond our reach. Its soft glow seemed to pulse in tune with my heartbeat, each throb a countdown to something inevitable. Marjorie led the way, her hands steady despite the trembling of her voice when she spoke. "We're close. The ritual chamber is just beyond that last corridor." My mind reeled at the thought of what we might find. The hospital was no longer just a building. It was a prison for souls, a nexus of ancient, malevolent power that had trapped generations in a cycle of torment and sacrifice. Ryan trailed behind, eyes wide and haunted. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by a palpable dread that made him jump at every creak and whisper. Johnny was silent now, confined to a narrow room marked isolation. The spider-like limbs that had erupted from his back had rendered him barely human, and every movement racked his body with pain. As we rounded the corner, the corridor abruptly ended in a heavy stone door carved with symbols I recognized from Marjorie's journal. Arcane sigils intertwined with depictions of spiders and skeletal figures. Marjorie stepped forward, her fingers tracing the carved runes with a familiarity born of years of whispered study. "This is it," she breathed. "The heart of the curse." I reached for the door, my hand trembling as I pushed against its weight. It resisted, heavy with the pressure of unseen forces, but with a final heave it gave way, revealing a chamber bathed in flickering candlelight. The room was circular, walls adorned with faded murals depicting a twisted history of Ataraxia Springs. Rituals, sacrifices, and the endless cycle of rebirth and death. In the center lay an altar draped in a tattered cloth, stained dark with age. Scattered around were dozens of golden orbs, each glowing faintly like the one I carried. Marjorie stepped to the altar, her eyes fixed on a large stone tablet inscribed with names. She ran her fingers over the weathered letters until she found one etched deeper than the rest. Marjorie Johansson, D. 1889. Her voice faltered. She was part of this, just like us. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing the candles in a heartbeat and plunging us into darkness. Whispers filled the air, voices old and broken, speaking in tongues I barely understood. The golden orbs flared, casting eerie shadows that twisted into monstrous shapes. From the darkness emerged the thing, its towering form blotting out what little light remained. Its golden eyes burned brighter than ever, reflecting the terror in our souls. Ryan stepped forward, resolve hardening his features. "We have to end this." But the hospital would not let us leave so easily. The floor trembled as unseen forces closed in, the walls groaning like the chest of some great beast. The golden orbs around the altar began to float, swirling in a chaotic dance that seemed to feed the darkness. I felt a pull in my chest, a connection drawing me toward the altar, toward the curse itself. Marjorie reached out, clutching my arm. "This is the sacrifice loop," she whispered. "We're all caught in it. The ritual never truly ends." A scream shattered the air. Johnny, his distorted cries echoing from the isolation room. We had to act, but time was slipping away. The darkness pressed closer, hungry and unforgiving. With a final glance at Marjorie, I stepped forward into the heart of the chamber, ready to face the nightmare that had bound us for generations. Every step I took felt heavier than the last, as if the air itself resisted my presence in that cursed chamber. The golden orbs hovered around the altar, pulsating with an eerie light that cast unsettling shadows on the cracked walls. The ancient murals seemed to writhe, their painted figures twisting in silent agony. Marjorie's voice broke the silence, low and trembling. "They've been here before us. All of them. Trapped in this endless loop, their souls tethered to this place." I looked down at my hands, feeling the weight of names I didn't recognize, but somehow knew. Names carved into the stone tablet, representing victims of a ritual that time refused to erase. The air shifted, colder now, as if the chamber itself exhaled a breath of despair. The whispers returned, a cacophony of sorrow and anger threading through the shadows. "Melissa," Marjorie said, her eyes locking onto mine with painful clarity. "You are the key, the last in the line of Johanssons, the one who can break this." A shudder ran through me. The thought was both terrifying and inevitable. How had I never understood that my very existence was woven into this nightmare? Before I could respond, a distant scream echoed through the corridors. The unmistakable sound of Ryan's agony. We rushed toward the source, hearts pounding in time with the rising crescendo of dread. Around us, the hospital seemed to shift and contort, the halls elongating, folding back upon themselves in impossible geometry. We found Ryan in a side chamber, writhing on the floor as shadowy tendrils coiled around him. His skin was pale, eyes wild with pain and confusion. "Help me," he gasped, voice barely audible. Marjorie and I fought against the creeping darkness, pulling him free just as the creature with the golden eyes appeared, blocking our escape. Its massive frame loomed, limbs twisting like gnarled branches, eyes burning with cruel intelligence. "This is the price," it hissed, voice layered with countless whispers. "The sacrifice to keep the loop alive." With a surge of desperation, Marjorie invoked the ancient words she had memorized from Marjorie's journal, chanting fiercely. The golden orbs flickered, the creature recoiling briefly, its form distorting in anger, but it was not defeated. Suddenly, a blinding light erupted from the altar, forcing us to shield our eyes. When the glow faded, the creature was gone, but so was Ryan. We stood in silence, the weight of loss pressing down like a stone. Marjorie's voice was barely a whisper. "We're running out of time. The loop tightens." And somewhere deep within me, I knew the ritual was far from over. The ritual chamber's shadows seemed to stretch and pulse with a life of their own, breathing in tandem with the horror that gripped my heart. The golden orbs lay scattered around the altar like sinister stars fallen from a corrupted sky, each one pulsing faintly, as if counting down the lives still tethered to this place. Marjorie's fingers trembled as she traced the worn stone tablet etched with names. Names I couldn't forget, no matter how desperately I tried. Each name was a tether, binding a soul to the endless nightmare of Ataraxia Springs. "Look," she whispered, voice tight with grief, pointing to a name carved deeper than the rest. "Marjorie Johansson, 1889. Her eyes searched mine, pleading for understanding. She was here before us. She tried to break the cycle, but became part of it instead. A cold shiver ran down my spine. The letter I received from Paris, the ghost of a sister I barely remembered, it all connected in a tangled web of despair and inevitability. Before I could ask another question, the chamber began to tremble. The walls groaned, ancient stone grinding against itself, as if the building was alive, awakening from a long slumber. A voice echoed, distant, disembodied, yet piercingly clear. "They never escape." The creature with the golden eyes emerged from the darkness once more, its grotesque limbs dragging across the floor, each movement resonating like a death knell. Its presence warped the air, distorting reality until the world itself seemed to blur. Marjorie stepped forward, chanting the ancient incantations she'd memorized from Marjorie's journal, her voice steady despite the fear threading through her words. The golden orbs flickered in response, pulsing like a heartbeat, but the creature remained unyielding. Suddenly, a scream tore through the chamber. It was Ryan, caught in the creature's grasp. His body twisted unnaturally, limbs bending in ways that defied human anatomy. Blood dripped from ragged tears in his skin as he struggled to break free. "Ryan!" Marjorie cried, rushing to his side, but the creature tightened its hold, dragging him closer to the altar. I reached out, desperate to help, but the shadows stretched to block me, cold and suffocating. The floor beneath us cracked, revealing glimpses of a hellish landscape. Flesh and bone fused into an unending mass of agony and despair. The golden orbs on the altar glowed brighter, casting ominous light that illuminated the faces of those trapped in the cycle before us, ghostly visages trapped in eternal torment. With a final agonized scream, Ryan was pulled into the darkness, disappearing beneath the altar as the golden orbs absorbed his essence. Marjorie collapsed beside the altar, tears streaming down her face. "It's feeding. The cycle continues." I sank to my knees, the weight of helplessness crushing me. The ritual was far from over. It was only beginning. From the shadows, a whisper. "Welcome back, Melissa. Your turn has come." I knew then that survival was no longer enough. To break free, I would have to confront the darkness within and become the sacrifice or the savior. Darkness folded over me like a shroud as I stood at the edge of the ritual chamber, the remnants of the golden orb's light fading into the heavy shadows. The air was thick with the stench of decay and old blood, a reminder of every soul claimed, every life trapped within the endless cycle of Ataraxia Springs. My hands trembled, sweat slicking my palms despite the chill that gnawed at my bone. Marjorie knelt beside the altar, murmuring prayers and chants from a long-forgotten tongue, her voice the only defiant sound in the oppressive silence. The door slammed shut behind us, echoing through the cavernous room like the final toll of a death bell. The walls seemed to pulse with malevolent intent, as if the building itself was aware of our presence and intent on devouring us whole. From the darkness, a low, guttural growl vibrated the floor. The creature with the golden eyes emerged, its immense frame blotting out the faint light, limbs twisting in unnatural contortions as it advanced slowly, deliberately. I met its gaze. Those twin orbs, glowing with cruel intelligence, bore into my soul. They reflected not just my fear, but the centuries of torment this place had witnessed. It was waiting for me, for the last sacrifice. Marjorie reached out, clutching my arm. "This ends now," she said, voice steady but filled with sorrow. "We break the loop tonight." The creature roared, a sound that shattered the fragile air and sent shards of stone tumbling from the ceiling. Shadows lengthened, creeping toward us like living tendrils. I stepped forward, clutching the leather-bound journal Marjorie had left behind, its pages whispering secrets in the darkness. The words had become my guide, a map through madness, a beacon of hope. Chanting the ancient incantation, I traced the symbols etched into the altar, feeling the power surge beneath my fingertips. The golden orbs responded, flickering wildly as if resisting the breaking of their eternal hold. The creature lunged, its limbs whipping through the air, but Marjorie met it head-on, her voice rising in a defiant crescendo. The shadows writhed, the walls shaking violently as the ritual reached its climax. A blinding light erupted, engulfing the chamber in pure, searing brilliance. The creature screamed, a sound of rage and despair, before dissolving into a cascade of golden sparks that scattered like fireflies fading into the night. When the light dimmed, silence fell, thick, heavy, and absolute. The oppressive weight lifted. The walls stopped pulsating. The stench faded, replaced by a faint breeze that whispered of freedom. Marjorie looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "It's over." But as relief washed over me, a faint sound echoed through the chamber. A soft ticking of a clock stopped at 3:33. A chilling reminder that some doors once opened never truly closed. Outside, the wind carried a whisper. The loop continues. The light faded, but the darkness that remained felt different. Thinner somehow, as if the suffocating veil that had blanketed Ataraxia Springs was finally lifting. Yet, even in that fragile quiet, an echo of unease rippled through the air, refusing to be silenced. Marjorie's knees hit the cold stone floor as she gasped for breath, hands shaking uncontrollably. I knelt beside her, the weight of everything we had endured settling like a stone in my chest. The golden orbs that once burned with insatiable hunger were now scattered shards of memory, remnants of a nightmare broken but not entirely banished. "We did it," I whispered, hardly daring to believe. "We broke the loop," but the hospital was no longer just a place. It was a living scar upon the earth, a wound that might never fully heal. A faint sound drew my attention. A soft tapping, rhythmic and slow, coming from the far end of the chamber. I turned, heart pounding, and saw it. A small, flickering shadow in the shape of a child standing at the threshold. Her costume was tattered, her eyes a glowing gold, those same eyes I had dreaded for so long. She smiled, a chilling curve of lips too wide for such a fragile frame. "Melissa," she whispered, voice layered with both innocence and menace. "You can't leave yet." Marjorie and I exchanged a glance. Fear and recognition mirrored in our eyes. The girl stepped forward and the chamber began to warp, walls bending and twisting, the floor rippling like liquid. Time itself seemed to unravel, folding past into present, nightmare into reality. "This is the curse," Marjorie said through clenched teeth. "It doesn't end with us, it only passes on." The girl's laughter echoed, a haunting melody that bounced off the stone, weaving itself into our minds. A sudden surge of energy burst from the altar, pulling me toward the edge of consciousness. Visions flooded my mind, faces lost to time, endless cycles of sacrifice, and a shadowy figure, myself, trapped in an eternal loop. I struggled against the pull, clinging to the fragments of hope we had fought so hard to find. "We're the keepers now," the girl said softly. "The new guardians of Ataraxia." The chamber's grip tightened, threatening to swallow us whole. But then Marjorie reached out, clasping my hand with fierce determination. "We choose our fate," she said, "not this place." With a final chant, the oppressive darkness shattered like glass, releasing a torrent of light that surged through the hospital's veins, cleansing the wounds it had inflicted. The child form flickered, her eyes losing their golden glow before she vanished into the light. As dawn crept through cracked windows, I found myself standing outside the ruined hospital, the morning sun warming my face for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Marjorie was beside me, silent but alive. The golden orbs were gone, but deep inside I knew the story was far from over. Some doors, once opened, never truly closed. Thank you so much for watching this journey into the haunting story of Ataraxia Springs. Your time and attention mean the world to me. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps support the channel and keeps these stories coming. Remember, some mysteries are better left unsolved, but facing the unknown is what makes us human. Stay curious, stay safe, and until next time, keep your lights on and your mind open. See you in the next story.